Somebody first started suggesting I study alchemy, and I was like, nah, I'm a real scientist. I don't have anything to learn from these alchemists. And it just kept coming up, and it kept coming up. And by the third time it had come up, I was like, all right, I'll keep an open mind. I'll read a book. And then as I read the book, I was like, oh my God, it's not anything like what they taught us in school that alchemy was about. Mm-hmm. And I realized, oh no, this is a gold mine. There's so much wisdom here, and it's really more about our transformational process. And then the impact that when we transform ourselves, what impact can we make in helping transform things outside of us and the world?
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here on this hot summer day.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk. You have a Ph.D. in physics, is that correct?
I do, yes.
That is, when I heard that, I was like, that is amazing. I love, because I'm all about merging science and spirituality, and that seems to be what you're all about too, which is why I wanted to talk with you, because I'm all into that, and I read a lot of books about science, but you have a PhD and you know so much from watching your show. I'm just blown away by the wealth of knowledge that you have to share. So I'm really excited to get into this.
Thank you. It's definitely my passion and my purpose. So
yeah, beautiful.
Happy to share.
Well, let's start a little bit by telling the listeners who don't know you a little bit about your story, who you are, and how you got to be where you are today.
Okay, well, it could be a long story, but I'll try to keep it short.
Long is fine.
Okay. So I was in the midst of pursuing my PhD in physics at the University of Washington. And this was back in 1999, 2000. And I was immersed in 80 hours a week of just left brain, science, and then classes and research and, homework and tests and all of that. And after about a year of graduate school, I went from previously just having a lot of diversity, sports and social time and different types of topics and so forth in college, to all of a sudden 80 hours a week of just physics. Mm-hmm. And that really left me out of balance after about a year. And it was very rigorous, a lot of hoops and, weeding out that they do, like they call it weeding out the weak ones in the physics graduate school kind of process. And so it was very challenging. And so after that first year, I found myself feeling dissatisfied, really not sure why I was sacrificing so much to do this PhD. I was just kind of following the traditional track of if you want to have a really good career, then you need to get a good education. And, the higher you get in your degrees, then the more chances you have in your career to, be successful. And so I was just following this academic track to get my PhD, but I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do with a physics degree. I knew that I didn't want to become a teacher of physics, like at a university or whatever, which is what most physicists were trained for. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll do research in a national lab, or maybe I'll go into industry and, get a job doing some kind of analysis work or something. But after this first year, graduate school wasn't at all what I was hoping it would be, and I was finding myself really out of balance and kind of depressed, and knowing something had to give. Like it wasn't worth the expense of my well-being and my happiness and sense of joy to get this PhD that I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. So I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to give up on the degree yet, but I need to change some things. And so I systematically started bringing all these different aspects that I had in my life prior to graduate school, because I knew I had that balance before. And I thought, okay, and like a scientist would, I'm like, what's the key? So is it athletics? Is it social time? Is it creative hobbies? Is it diversity? So I started bringing all these aspects of life back in. And they all helped. So about a year later, it's like, okay, well, I'm feeling better, but there's still something really core missing. And it's the key to my joy. It's the key to my sense of purpose and meaning and happiness. And one day I was just at the gym and just kind of thinking about it at the back of my mind as I was doing my workout. And this little voice came in and said, well, there's still one thing you haven't brought back in. And it's like, what is that? And it was spirituality. So at that point in my journey, I was kind of shocked that spirituality would be it, because I was pretty well indoctrinated into the scientific way of thinking. And yet it was the only thing that I'd had previously. I never really put it in front, but it was just always there on the side. And because I grew up with a fairly open family that encouraged our exploration into different spiritual belief systems. And here is the one thing. So I thought, all right, let's give it a try. But I knew at that point, anything I was going to believe spiritually had to complement what I knew to be true scientifically. So I couldn't go into just blind faith and religion. And I needed to find something that really had some depth and some way of weaving with the science. And so I started diving into any science and consciousness, science and spirituality, Tao of physics type stuff, so where Eastern philosophies and quantum physics overlapped. And it started just reading books and going to maybe a few conferences, but it started to get me really excited. And I remembered at some level I remember what inspired me to go into physics in the first place, which was a desire to understand the universe and how it works at a bigger scale and at a more fundamental level, beyond just our lives, and all the dramas that we get into in our society. And so it reinfused some purpose and passion into my life by bringing spirituality in. So I realized that spirituality was a key for me to maintain that sense of balance and meaning and a bit of awe at the universe. And then it became such a passion that I kept doing it. And then that led me towards seeking deeper and deeper truths, which then led me into more the mystery school tradition and Hermetics and Alchemy and Kabbalah, and went pretty deep with it. And then looking for community and so forth that could resonate. So.
Wow. So beforehand, when you're saying you're bringing back in some of that spirituality, what was your experience or tradition with it beforehand? Before
I got into graduate school?
Yeah.
So prior, it was just sort of always there. So my parents were, they were fairly hands-off with. They didn't indoctrinate us with anything. They allowed us to make up our own minds. And yet their belief system had kind of a foundation from the Edgar Cayce studies. So they were already a little more alternative. And then my mom was really heavily involved with the Monroe Institute, which got into all this kind of journeys out of body and consciousness, that we are consciousness, we are more than our physical bodies. And so I was raised with tools of visualization and meditation. And, I was going to acupuncturists and chiropractors when it was still woo-woo. And, that natural approach is kind of, it's okay, even if it's not acceptable to other people. And so I had a really good foundation from my upbringing, and I had a lot of freedom to explore and make up my own mind. And so when I was in college, for example, is really when in high school, I just kind of kept it all at arm's length. I didn't really make any decisions one way or another because I didn't feel like I knew. And who was I to make a decision? It's like, I don't know what's true, so I'm just going to listen to everybody's input. And in college, I started to find my personal resonance through the transcendental poets like Wordsworth and Thoreau, and I had an honors English class that really just inspired me, Wordsworth and William Blake and some of these guys. So that really spoke to me at a deeper level. And then I explored a bit of Zen and some Native American shamanism and some of the Buddhist philosophies, but Taoism a little bit, like I Ching and stuff like that. So just kind of, floating around. A little New Age, but not. I was never really too into New Age because it gets kind of airy-fairy, and I was very grounded and scientific. So, But it was always just sort of like picking the pieces here and there, and I took what would resonate with me, and then anything else that felt like dogma or didn't really resonate, I'd just leave it alone, and just sort of created my own personal philosophy of life, and it just sort of informed my view of things in the background.
Why do you think it is that those things tend to be so separated, science and spirituality?
Personally, so from the way they indoctrinate you, it's because So the scientists will say, well, there is no spiritual realm, because science today, or not so much at today, but when I was in graduate school, it was very materialist kind of driven. Mm-hmm. And their philosophy has become that everything is explainable. Everything, is physical. There's a physical reason for it. And, this stuff of the mind is psychology, but it's not really the spirit. Mm-hmm. So there's this very materialist perspective in the scientific world. And then in the religious world, it's the Bible, it's the law, it's mm-hmm. the, whatever the sacred doctrines are of that religion. And they don't necessarily try to branch over to the science, because sometimes it contradicts what their religious teachings are. Mm-hmm. So I think personally, when you look at the history, because science actually came out of alchemy, mm-hmm. and alchemy was spiritual. It was like spirituality and the science were one and the same. And it was this pursuit to understand divine law and divine principles of creation and transformation, and how can we as creative beings with a higher intelligence play an active role in supporting the evolution of the physical, in helping bring art into it and science into it so we can perfect it. Mm-hmm. And so science, physics, chemistry, medicine, pharmacology, even psychology, all of these scientific practices of today came out of alchemy.
Yeah.
And so, but the way they train you is that alchemy was, it's just a bunch of pseudoscientists trying to turn lead into gold, and they kind of create this bad reputation for it in your mind. And I had that when I first, somebody first started suggesting I study alchemy, and I was like, nah, I'm a real scientist. I don't have anything to learn from these alchemists. And it just kept coming up, and it kept coming up. And by the third time it had come up, I was like, all right, I'll keep an open mind. I'll read a book. And then as I read the book, I was like, oh my God, it's not anything like what they taught us in school that alchemy was about. Mm-hmm. And I realized, oh no, this is a gold mine. There's so much wisdom here, and it's really more about our transformational process. And then the impact that when we transform ourselves, what impact can we make in helping transform things outside of us and the world? So I think it was really political and money driven is mm-hmm. why it's separated. The scientists in the Middle Ages and whatnot, they wanted to have the freedom to practice their science and their art, but sometimes the church was a little threatened by that, so they had to divorce themselves from the church so as not to be a threat to the church. Mm-hmm. And then there was other reasons later down the line that were more money driven. So for example, with medicine, the alchemists were a lot of times the doctors and the pharmacologists, and they were making these remedies, but it would take months sometimes to create one remedy, and that's because of the alchemical process using consciousness and spirit and harnessing the cycles of the stars and the sun and the moon and all of this, and it wasn't really conducive to the bottom line. So if you just take all that out and you just do the chemistry, now we can produce things faster, but now it's just chemistry without the spirit and the essence in it. So I think it's more political and money driven why they separated, not a fundamental difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can see kind of on both sides that human desire for certainty and to not allow for mystery, because whether you're kind of in a dogmatic religion or you're looking at just science, there's that need to this is right and this is how it is, when everything's always changing and we're exploring and trying to understand this one thing, that we're in this one truth, and there can only be that. We're looking at it from different perspectives, but all there can be is the one truth. So it's not being willing to change your mind or be wrong or allow there to be things that maybe you can't fully understand, and allow sort of that mystery of it to come in seems to be the space where they can merge. Yeah.
I think from some of the scientific perspective, they also saw that people, when they believed in things like magic and the unknown and all of this, there were superstitions that started to really drive human nature, and they were trying to get them out of superstitious behaviors and belief systems, and no, there's very reasonable explanation for all of this. It's not, the gods punishing us. And there's a balance point there.
Yeah.
But I think that science then went too far in cutting out the spirit versus, let's find the synergy. And I think from an alchemical perspective, we needed to go through that time of separation of spirit and science so that they could each kind of be refined and taken to a whole new level just within their own essence. Mm-hmm. But now we're at a time where they need to come back together because one needs to inform the other so that we can move into a synergy and creating a new world from a much more elevated perspective.
Yeah. In your journey of exploring all of these things and studying all of these different spiritual aspects and scientific aspects, were there any moments, kind of big aha moments or awakenings where it really came together and you were able to see things clearly? Yeah.
So when I started studying alchemy was a big aha moment, and I started to realize, this is a formula that's a natural pattern or natural set of steps that things go through as they transform and evolve. So that was that became a big oh wow, this is really gold here.
Yeah.
And then when I studied the Kabbalistic teachings on the Tree of Life, it took me a bit to understand it, but it became this way of organizing all of this other stuff that I had studied previously. So it's I could take the psychology and map it onto the Tree of Life. I could take physics and map it onto the Tree of Life. I could take relationship dynamics and personal, kind of dynamics and, astrology and, everything could be mapped onto the Tree of Life. So it was this one template and organizing system where everything came together and you could start to see how they all connected and interrelated. And then that provided a whole new insights, and it rewires the way you think as well. And it makes, for a more multidimensional way of thinking. So through my studies of Kabbalah, through the modern mystery school tradition, I had both the knowledge, in this sort of template of the Tree of Life coming, but I also had a lot of personal transformation happen by studying it. And those personal transformations were my life transformed so much in just the first year of studying through this program that my parents, who know me better than anyone, were what's happened to you over the last year? You're completely different, and all the old dynamics I used to have with my siblings. I was just really being more a higher kind of version of me, a better version of me, versus just always falling into the same, dynamics of tit for tat that we do with our siblings.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It's when we were able to I feel I've seen sometimes with those systems, something like the Tree of Life or something like Spiral Dynamics that kind of maps things out and shows you. When I took this class and this course on the Tree of Life, and when I first got introduced to it, I was these are just a bunch of words that I don't understand. But
I had the same experience.
I found is when you're able to tap into an experiential understanding, whether that's through meditation practices or whatever can get you into that place of I can experientially see what this is talking about, then the map helps you kind of make sense of all of that and clear it up and integrate it. Yeah.
It takes a little bit of study, you know, and digging into it to try to understand it. I was the same way. I was the everything they were saying was going straight over my head. I'm I have no idea what they're talking about. But I had this intuitive, energy that was rising up in me every time they talk about Kabbalah, no clue what they're saying, but I need to know more. It was kind of the feeling I'd have. And then as I got into it, it was oh no, this is what I've been looking for. But it was the experiential process of my own transformation, and then reflecting that to how that was relating to where we were on the ascension journey up the tree, that I went, oh my God, this is an amazing system. It is creating and catalyzing through what we call these ascensions up each part of the tree. It was catalyzing this spiritual alchemy, personal transformational process. And so that experience and living it directly, and that's what I loved about the mystery tradition, was that it's not about dogma. It's about your direct experience, and you have the knowledge and the answers within you, but we sometimes just need a little guidance and some keys to help us tap into what's already inside of us.
Yeah.
And I also had massive transformation when I got activated and initiated. So I had sort of these different, the life activation is like this thing where you turn on more of the blueprints, the codes within us, our potential, and it helps align us with more of our purpose and our potential. And it created a greater level of self-awareness and a greater intuitive connection to what choices are going to really best support me and align most with my higher purpose and potential. And then when I received initiation into the lineage of the ancient mystery school tradition, I really found it accelerated my progression. So things really started to speed up about 10 times faster. So it's more than just like there's our self-study and meditation practices and all of those things, visualizations, affirmations, things like that we can do for ourselves. But when I really stepped into the lineage teachings from an ancient tradition, there was a whole nother level deeper that it could take us. So we have to do our own work to prepare to be ready for that kind of thing. But then when we are ready, it's like there's other doors that open up that weren't really accessible before, and things speed up.
And when you can kind of come together into these collective energies, I like to think of it as we have all these cells in our body, right, that come together and create these more powerful systems. And as individual humans, we're like this cell that has all this life and this power, but then we come together and we create these lineages and these traditions and these really powerful things. So I love that. I would love to talk a little bit diving into sort of the quantum world, because that's a lot of what you teach and talk about. So for anybody who does not have a PhD in physics and does not really know about the quantum world, could you explain a little bit about what that is and how that relates to everything we've been talking about?
Sure. So I think the best way is to compare it to a previous paradigm. So in the past, we had the scientific paradigm, but it influenced so much of how our world operates today, which we could say is a Newtonian paradigm. And there was 4 basic principles of that sort of way of thinking about the world. And one of them was, it says everything is deterministic. You can determine everything. And if it's deterministic, then you can control it, right? They said, like, if there was an all-seeing eye at the beginning of creation that knew the initial positions of every particle and, you know, its trajectory or whatever, then it would forever into the future be able to predict where that thing was. So it was very determinable. So that was one of them. And then it was also separation, right? So it's the idea that you can take a whole thing and you can break it down into its parts, and then by understanding the individual parts, then you should know how the whole thing works. So this separation was a key piece of it. And then there was reductionism, which is kind of similar, that, you know, you can reduce things to just individual aspects. So separatism, reductionism, materialism would be the 4th one. So materialism says everything is physical, that there is no real spirit, right? That it kind of divorced mind and spirit from physicality. So if we had determinism, materialism, separatism, and reductionism, and reason, like everything should be rational, right? So our society became very much we valued reason, be reasonable, you know, think with reason. And it encouraged individualism as well, because everything is separate, and everything is kind of outside of us. So there is no destiny. It's all sort of predetermined, right? So it kind of took free will away. So there were these Newtonian paradigms, and it wasn't really what Newton implemented, but it was what scientists after him implemented in their divorcing of science and spirituality. So that ruled our paradigm for about 400 years. And it was so successful, and it became, our world went from mystery and some superstition and magic to rationalism, and everything is material. And, you know, so it kicked off the industrial age. It was very successful at progressing society in some ways. And so then it got applied into business, and it got applied into economics, and it got applied into relationship ideas. It got applied into all kinds of ways. So then about 100 years ago, quantum physics comes around, and they start finding that that the Newtonian paradigm the Newtonian way of doing things doesn't actually explain some things. And there was these sort of anomalies that were happening within, like when dealing with electrons and very small particles. So the more they started to discover electrons and protons and neutrons and what's really happening inside of that atom, they were starting to tap into the quantum world, which quantum usually means at the very small scales. And it also means that things are discrete rather than continuous. So like an electron, when it's exciting in an orbit of an atom, like if a photon comes in and it excites, it kind of gives it energy, and it'll leap from one orbital to another orbital. But it's discrete. It's not like a continuous rising up. It has to jump, and that's what we call a quantum leap. And in that jump, it kind of blips out of existence and blips back into existence. And so it's like, where does it go? So there's this gap that we find in the quantum means to quantize, to kind of make it discrete, or there's gaps in it. And so then as they discovered more and more of these sort of anomalies, they started to come up with a whole new theory that became quantum mechanics. And the core essence of quantum paradigm is that things are, instead of being deterministic, everything is uncertain. There's uncertainty in how things operate in the quantum realm. And so we can't control it. Then they discovered this observer effect, that when we expect like a photon to be a wave, and we set up our experiment to see if it's a wave, oh yeah, it's a wave, we get the wave-like behavior. But when we check to see if it's a particle instead, it's the same setup, but we're measuring it in a different way, we see, it's a particle. Well, how can it be a wave and a particle? It can only be one or the other in the old mindset. So in quantum mindset, it's saying, no, it's both. It can be either. It really depends on how we choose to observe it. So all of a sudden, we, the observer, play a part in manifesting, what state these quantum things take in the physical. And so this observer effect brings in consciousness, our expectations, our assumptions, and our choices. All of a sudden it gives us choice. We're participants in this process. And then things are also complementary. So there's this complementarity aspect that really is important, where you can measure one variable. So like, let's say we want to measure the position to a high degree of accuracy of a particle. Well, we can measure that position, but then we lose any information about its momentum, right? So we can only know one or the other with precision. And so that's the complementarities, like energy and time, so these complementary sort of parameters or qualities. And and then everything is connected. So there's this idea of entanglement, that instead of having to have a direct force acting upon something to transfer information to it, you can have two particles that were sort of created together, and then you separate them even by light years, and then you do something to one of them, and that information instantaneously travels to another. And so they came up with this idea of entanglement, which is not bound by space or time. So it really throws, the old Newtonian ideas out the window. And then the other thing that would come from all of that is that things are a whole, and that you can't just break down all the parts to understand the whole, because there's an interaction between the parts, and those interactions create a whole new synergy, or something else emerges out of that. So we have to understand the dynamics of interaction, not just the individual parts. So it completely turns Newtonian physics on its head. But it's not like common sense. When we look at our world and how our world operates at a macro scale, it doesn't really match up with what we think reality is about. And so it's taken a long time for humans, even scientists, to adapt this new mindset, or this new way of viewing the fundamental truths of reality. So it's a bit of a rewiring that has to happen.
I love that. That gets me, I'm like beaming over here because I get so excited about this stuff, because that's magic. That's straight up magic. And sometimes when we talk about science, we think it's like, oh, well, if we can just explain it, then it's like, then it's that. And then it becomes not as magical.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to that, I'm like, that is amazing. The fact that like our observation affects the way something behaves and how everything's connected and things disappearing and like, where did that go? That's all so beautiful, and it creates so much wonder about this world that we're in that just gets me so excited.
I love that. I had the same kind of renewal, the same kind of excitement of like science in my graduate school career, especially. It was stomping out my creativity, because it's like, just follow the rules, know how to drive things, work everything from a mathematical first principles perspective, and everything is explainable. And it was just really stomping out the creativity. And then and they discouraged philosophy. They discouraged talking about the meaning of things from a philosophical level. And then as I got into quantum physics, and honestly, the more I studied science and math and quantum physics, the more I saw that there was these beautiful things, like everything felt so connected. And, studying about some of the fundamental constants of our universe and how connected they are and how finely tuned they are, even though they seem like they're separate at first, but you later find they're actually really connected to each other, and how finely tuned our universe is for life to happen within it. And then the whole quantum realm opens up the possibilities for our participation and consciousness and magic, to happen again. And it does bring that sense of awe. And, I would say in the previous paradigm, it was seeing is believing. I will believe it when I see it, and you got to prove it to me first. But in the quantum paradigm, it's the opposite. It's believing is seeing. That when you believe, then you open up your ability to perceive so many other possibilities that you hadn't even thought of before. So it's like Alice down the rabbit hole into Wonderland, and everything kind of turns on its head. And
so how do you think this information could affect or change the paradigm or the view that your average person has of the world? If somebody's listening and is like, okay, cool, what does that mean for me, or why should I care about this? How does that affect our way of existing in life?
Well, I think first of all, it puts the power back in our hands. So it says you are at the center of your creation in your life. And, what you think in your head matters. It's not just what you do. It's also how you think and what you expect. If you expect that the other shoe's always going to drop, or if you expect that somebody's always going to leave you, and it may not even be a conscious expectation, it could be a subconscious expectation, some fear that's from our past, and we're thinking, oh, this always happens to me. And those ways that we talk to ourselves in our mind create potentially negative situations, because our mind and our intention and our consciousness affects the quantum manifestations. And so the quantum field is in cooperation with us, and it takes instruction from us in a way. And so when we, whether consciously or unconsciously, we are creating our own life. So I think that when you shift to this awareness, you realize I am at the center of my creation. And if I can change my mindset, if I can shift from negative thinking to positive thinking, if I can let go of these old emotions of anxiety and fear and depression, and really start to, take back my power, and realize that I can create a different situation in my life, then we can start to rise up to what can I do to make a positive difference? Get outside of our box of thinking, get creative again, and, let our possibilities open up wider for, the magic to happen. So I think that's a big piece.
Amazing. I love that. So you have a show on Gaia called Mystery Teachings. Can you tell us a little bit about the show?
Yeah, so Mystery Teachings is going now into its 4th season. The 4th season's about to come out mid-September. So it's the first season was all about the science. So we got into some pretty deep physics and astrophysics, and where is, modern physics and science theory at, and then how does that compare to ancient metaphysics, and especially from Western tradition, but also, I tie in more universal teachings, both Eastern and Western, and showing the parallels between what modern science is now verifying, or are at least the most accepted current theories, and then how those match up with some, especially, Kabbalah is one of my main languages for relating, and Hermetic teachings and alchemical teachings. And so those are my strengths, but I also draw in some Eastern teachings where I know the parallels. And so we take a deep exploration into, the quantum physics, the astrophysics with cosmology, string theory, but in a way that helps us relate to it. And what does this mean for our lives? And how can we shift from that old paradigm of Newtonian thinking into quantum thinking? And then season 2 goes more into the microcosm of us. What is our potential? How do we operate? So we get into things like the DNA, the nervous system, the senses, the brain, but then what are tools that we can do to help us rewire and tap into more of our full potential, and really understand, again, the science and the metaphysics of who and what we are, and what we're destined for. The vastness of our potential. So the idea is to really inspire and empower people to recognize that we're so much more than what we've been taught.
Yeah.
And then the third season gets a little more into mystery school teachings. Like we explore things like crystals, astral travel, dreams, and interpretation of dreams. We get into some Kabbalah, some alchemy. So there's social alchemy, like what's happening in our world today, and how does that line up with the alchemical process so that we can understand where we're at and where we need to get to. And then season 4 is going to be all about the hero's journey through studying our the 22 archetypes that relate to what we would say are our multidimensionality. And so it's like, who are we in relationship to this archetype and that archetype? And so we work with the major arcana of the tarot as sort of examples of those 22 archetypes, and then we go through the journey of the transformational process in the hero's journey, from kind of starting as the fool, ending as the world. And I'm really excited to see how that one turns out. It's going to be fun.
That one comes out in September, you said?
Mid-September is what I've been told.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that. That's going to be so great. Yeah, the show is amazing. For anybody listening, I'll link the show in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the captions, so you can find that and watch that. So I want to talk about a few specific episodes that I've watched of the show that I think would be cool to dive into. Okay. The first one being, there's an episode on the show about higher states of emotions. And I think right now we're in a time where so many people are stressed out and anxious. A lot of our security structures are falling apart, and we're looking for something to grab onto. So what are some things that people can do? You talk on that episode of the show about how we can learn to stop the stress and actually shift our state of being. So can you share a little bit, if people are feeling really anxious right now, out of control, like their emotions are all over the place, how can we sort of shift that for ourselves internally?
So what happens when we go into fear? We get triggered at a very deep brain level. And so it sort of creates that fight, flight, freeze response, survival mode response. And it's often hard to think beyond our immediate circumstances when we're in that mode. So the most important thing is that we learn to control and calm the deep brain system, that fight, flight, freeze, kind of body, ego, emotional, kind of response. So a lot of this has to do with the brain, and our thoughts affect our chemistry, our emotions affect our chemistry affects our brain, and all of this. So there's different techniques that we can do to help calm. And, often when we're in stress mode, there's a lot of cortisol being produced that triggers the stomach acid production, that then triggers how much serotonin we're, generating in our gut, which then communicates back to the brain. And, if we're not getting this proper serotonin levels, we're going to feel depressed. And, it's just this vicious cycle. And yet we can shift this. So practices like deep breathing, and especially with the deep brain, there's the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And so your parasympathetic nervous system is the relaxation system in the body, and the sympathetic is the get up and go, kind of active response system in the body. So we want to, when we're in stress mode, we want to learn how to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system and the deep brain. And so your deep brain is all about breathing, heart rate, movement, and touch, sometimes chanting, things like that. So just taking like really deep breaths, but like feel the breath kind of going along the sides, because this is where the vagus nerve runs, is from the brain down to the heart and the gut. And the heart and the gut actually have more information being passed up to the brain than the brain does down to the heart and the gut. So we want to learn to shift out of our head into our heart and into our center of being, which is more down in the near the navel. And so if you take deep breaths, you kind of feel it running down here on the sides of the neck, and then you feel it coming into what we call the hara, or the second chakra, which is just about an inch below the belly button or the navel. And you just breathe into that area of the body. That's going to, you take in breaths through the nose and out breaths through the mouth. And it's like so it's kind of a strong out breath that really starts to calm you down pretty quickly. And then the other thing would be like the basic steps of meditation. So meditation starts with proper breathing and relaxing the body. So you can just kind of scan your body and go through anywhere that feels like it's holding tension, and then pull the breath into that area of the body. And then as you breathe out, you're breathing out the tension. And you just keep going through every part of the body. You can start at the head and work your way down to the feet. You can also start at the feet and work your way up, body part by body part, just getting it to relax and pulling the breath in. And that already starts to focus your mind on something more productive than the hamster wheel, or the monkey mind kind of effect. Yeah. So we have relaxing the body, we have proper breathing, which is in the nose, out the mouth, and then we have visualization, right? So you can visualize like light coming in, and that light comes in from above, like imagine the sun above you or something, and the light comes in from above, and it starts to just fill your body from head to toe with light. And this combination of these three things will take you deeper and deeper and deeper from what we call a beta brainwave state, which is really active, fight flight, but it's also like I'm studying, I'm focused on the outside things, I'm kind of distracted with the outside world, to as we close the eyes and we start to relax, it brings us into what we call an alpha brainwave state, which is a little bit slower brainwaves or neural oscillations. And as we go into that alpha, it's like daydreaming, it's light relaxation. It's usually when we're taking a nice relaxing shower or bath, we kind of get into that mode. When you're creating, you're creating art or something, you're really in that zone, you're in an alpha. When you're doing yoga or Tai Chi or, just sort of light guided visualizations, those are all alpha state. So when you get into alpha state, it starts to relax the body and relax the mind. And if you go deeper, the goal of deeper meditations is to get into what we would call theta. And theta is where it's kind of this transition between waking and sleeping. And when we go to sleep at night, usually we'll transition through that. And that's when you start seeing kind of colors and images and stuff, like a little bit of dream-like scape, and you can follow that into a dream and fall asleep. But with meditation, you want to not fall asleep. You want to stay awake, but you want to hold and extend the amount of time that we're in theta. So that, that takes time to really get to that level where you can access theta and not fall asleep and stay awake, right? Because it's usually when people are hitting theta, they're starting to nod their heads like this and fall asleep. And so the discipline of deeper forms of meditation would be to keep yourself upright and awake, and yet you're in the zone and your mind goes so quiet. And then from there, you can work with like a contemplation or a power word, or like use it as a mantra. You could go work with sacred geometry visualizations. There's a lot of different types of visualizations you could do that really are working at a much deeper level of consciousness. So there's a few tips. Otherwise, just, exercise, go work it off. The stress, like get out there and move your body, like just that bilateral motion of walking or running, or even rollerblading, or, any of those kinds of bilateral motions starts to automatically reharmonize the brain between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And it also starts to take that emotional energy and that mental energy, and it just grounds it out through physical activity. So that's why a lot of people find that going and exercising is really supportive of their emotional well-being. So those are a few things. I don't remember if there's anything else I said on the that episode. You can jog my memory.
You talked on the episode about the alpha waves, and how children kind of are normally in that state, and it's more playful and imaginative. And it's as you're talking about that, I was thinking about what we were talking about around the quantum ideas of how it's interesting in a meditative state with just by shifting our awareness and our consciousness and kind of what we're focusing on, and that can shift our body, which seems to be correlated to that idea that the observer can affect what we're observing. Is there a correlation there to
For sure.
to that?
So to get into that observer effect, where you can really tap into the quantum field, it takes a coherent state of being. So to really access the quantum realm requires coherence. So one way of thinking, what is coherence? Well, it's like a laser. So when scientists shoot, they want to affect the quantum state of an atom, they shoot a laser at it. And a laser is like, it's one frequency. The light coming out is all one frequency. It's all the waves are, completely aligned and in sync with each other, in phase with each other, and it's very focused, right? So that's a principle that we can apply to ourselves, is when we can bring ourselves into a coherent state of being, then we can access more that through our consciousness, the quantum field. So to get into a coherent state of being, you definitely have to get into a more meditative state, where you're not just kind of in the head, you're sinking deeper into the heart. Your heart rate rhythms start to become more coherent. The variability of the heart rate becomes more coherent. Your brain waves become more coherent, and they start to sink deeper. And I would say really the ideal place where we really get into coherence, one, you can be in a really high state of joy. Not like a manic kind of thing, but real joy. So joy completely brings us into coherence. You can also go into a state of gratitude. So when we're in gratitude, that really helps with the heart, connecting into the heart energies. And then the other would be to get into a deep state of theta meditation. And even there's some gamma frequencies that, they did some studies with some monks that had done a lot of training with the Dalai Lama, and they have these compassion meditations that they do. And so they've studied the brain waves of these monks while in meditation. And what they show is that they go from an awake state to then alpha to then theta, and they start getting into this deep connection to cosmic compassion. And then they shift from that theta state. As soon as they start filling themselves and feeling at one with that compassion, they shift and they now send it out to the world. And when they start sending that compassion out to the world, their brainwaves start measuring what they call a gamma frequency, which is around 40 hertz or 40 beats per second, whereas theta is more like 7 to 8 kind of beats per second. So between 5 and 8 beats per second is the theta. So all of a sudden there's this 40 hertz spike, but it starts like in the deeper brain, like the hypothalamus or the hippocampus. It starts there, it comes up, and then it sweeps from the prefrontals back down to the heart. Everything becomes like this unified heart and mind, but it's directing it out to the world. They also see that when we're in creativity, like heightened creativity mode, it's like a peak performance kind of state. You're really in the zone, but you're really active, but it's super creative. That's also going to register gamma frequencies. So it's like we have to be flowing our love, our passion, our compassion, our creativity towards something outward. That is, it's not about us or what we're going to get. There's no agenda. It's just purely in the flow, and that brings us into that coherent state. So that's why I'd say joy, will get you into that coherent state as well.
Amazing. That's beautiful. Another episode that I really loved at the show, there's so many good ones. There's so many topics and things. And this is a short podcast episode, so everybody was just going to have to go watch
They're going to have to watch Mystery Teachings.
And to go watch the show to get all the good info, because we can only talk about so much. But I would love to talk a little bit about reclaiming the divine feminine. That's something that you talk about, and I feel like we're in a time where the feminine is rising, and that's something really important to understand and to see. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, we went from having the masculine principles. Okay, so when I talk about feminine and masculine, I'm going to talk more about energy flow, not gender. It's not about your physical body and gender. It's about your energy flow and the type of flow. So masculine is going to be more outwardly directed. It's more assertive. It initiates creative projects. It takes that assertive thing and it gives it direction, and it's a little kind of controls the direction of things. And then the feminine is going to be more, it's taking things in, it's receiving, it's contracting it, it's bringing all that power and that energy and that essence from the masculine, it's bringing it into form. So it's more like putting the structure to things. And you can think of a woman when she's birthing a child inside, she's received the masculine seed or impulse, and then it's this energy of having to have patience, 9 months, right? Patience, and nurturing, and allowing something to generate with insight. A new form is building inside of you, but you're just holding it inside. You're holding it inside. So it's not really this outward kind of making things happen type of flow. But then ultimately there is the birthing. So the feminine is always what births things into manifestation. But in that birthing, it's contractions, and we have to find rhythm, and we have to learn to push with the right rhythm. You can't go against you have to go with it. And so there's different principles of the feminine and the masculine, both of which are needed for creation. Now, in our world, we had a time of matriarchy, like thousands and thousands of years ago. The Mother Earth was the major deity, not Father Sky or the Sun. It was the Earth kind of energy, and it was very much a matriarchal, matrilineal sort of power structure. And that lasted for about 7,000 years. And then there was a shift at some point, and we shifted more into the patriarchy and the patrilineal power, and we shifted from the major deity being, the Father Sky or the Sun God. It was a male kind of deity that was the main focus. And we've had about 6,000 to 7,000 years of that as well. Now, women felt rather suppressed, and there was suppression or devaluing of the feminine that happened during that time, especially in the last, let's say 1,000, maybe actually more the last couple hundred years, especially when the scientific, rational kind of logical way of being came into effect, and being intuitive, being creative, being emotional started becoming more devalued, and it's like, oh, it was diminished, right? So in the effort to rise up to power again with the women, there was this movement of women starting to rise up, and this started happening all the way with the women's suffrage, and the right to vote and all of that. But then it started off really good, but then it went too far. And because the feminine qualities were devalued, and it was programmed into us that way, even women started to value masculine qualities more than feminine qualities. And so the pendulum swung too far. As women were seeking equal power, they went more into being too masculine.
Yeah.
Like assertive, I have to be controlling, I have to, be just as good at everything as a man is, and so there was this competition that started rising up, and I think that went too far, and it really did a disservice ultimately to the effort of trying to re-empower the feminine, because the feminine's power isn't about having to prove ourselves worthy. The feminine is worthy innately because she is the birther. She produces life into the world, and you don't have to do anything to prove that worthiness. It's just innate, right? Whereas the masculine is more about demonstrating power. So I think for the feminine to really rise into its proper balanced expression of feminine empowerment versus empowered women trying to compete, for that we're the same as or equal or better than men. We're different, and it's okay to be different, but equally important, equally powerful in the process of creation. And so it's really about recognizing our own innate worthiness, that I don't have to prove myself to anybody to be considered good and powerful and, a worthy member of the human race. So when we can bolster that self-esteem within by loving ourselves, accepting ourselves, nurturing, taking care of ourselves, then, we will rise into this more pure expression of the divine feminine that is very powerful. It's very beautiful, and the world very much needs it. I mean, the world needs nurturing right now. The world needs love. The world needs that care and acceptance that the feminine innately brings by being kind of the mother. Whether you're physically a mother or not, that essence is still there within the feminine.
Yeah.
So it's and it's happening, but it's we have to be careful about. Right now, there's a lot of victimhood within women and women's empowerment. If any time we fall into victimhood, we've lost. Because that's not empowerment. And so for us to really come into empowerment, we have to recognize, well, we've helped create this situation too. And so rather than being a victim to, the patriarchy or whatever, it's like, no, I am not a victim to anybody. And my power is within me. It's not in anyone else. And my responsibility is within me too, to speak up, to, also heal, right? So the healing needs to take place. The wounds of the past, which is when we're in victimhood. It's not that you weren't victimized. Victimhood is a mindset versus what happened to you. It's not about what happened to you. It's about what meaning you made out of what happened to you, and whether you let that what happened to you in the past continue to be your story. Because remember that expectation of our mindset and how that creates our reality. So as women heal and forgive and let go of the past attachments, that will allow for that rising up of inner self-esteem again, and to heal. Forgiveness doesn't mean I'm condoning what happened. It means I'm letting go of the burden of this emotion that continues to suppress my energy, right? And so I'm forgiving to set myself free from the past, so that I can really be, my greater empowerment and potential. And so when we do that, it also requires that we start caring for ourselves, right? So when the feminine is about care and nurture, so it has to start with the self, right? Take care of yourself. So many women are putting everybody else before them. They put their job before them, they put their kids before them, they put their partners before them, they put their parents and their family before them. And they feel guilty inside if they take care of themselves first. So that needs to shift, because we are worthy, and we need to recognize that we're worthy of taking care of ourselves. And nobody else is going to fulfill your needs but you. So through self-care, healing, forgiveness, love and acceptance, like that is what's going to really help the feminine rise up to her full beauty, power, glory, and readiness to, help heal the issues of the world.
Yeah.
And as we heal inside, we become part of the change that needs to happen in the world.
Yeah, I love that about forgiveness, because that's something that I've really come to understand about what that means, because a lot of times we think, oh, if I forgive someone, that means that it becomes about blame, like who's to blame, or am I moving into something that's not healthy for me, or
we're saying that what they did was okay, but we don't feel like it was okay, so then I have to hold on to that anger so that I continue to make them wrong, right?
Yes. And there's this quote that I love from a teacher that I really like, Sadhguru. He says that anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right. Yes.
So it's like basically you're choosing, when you choose to forgive, you're like, I'm going to stop poisoning myself because of what you did. So it's stepping into that responsibility of, I'm not going to identify with this, because that identification is really powerful too, saying I am a victim, I am this, because you're not that. That's not who you are.
Exactly.
So
yeah, we're not what happened to us.
Yes.
We are some much more magnificent being inside, that we just need to pull the layers of personality and ego and the masks that we hide behind. We need to kind of pull those away so that we can get back in touch with who we really are.
Yeah.
And that is the other big thing that I would say, in this time of stress and fear, that it's because there's so much outward focus, that if you want to overcome that stress and fear, it's about get to know thyself inside. And the more you come to know who you really are from a deeper, more empowered place, then you know that you can handle whatever life brings you. And you don't have to be afraid of what's going on. And you won't be as swayed by the media that is trying to pump the fear into people, and politicians that are trying to manipulate, opinions and thoughts. And so you really free yourself the more you know yourself.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
I love that. So what's next for you? You have season 4 coming up. You have an event coming up, right?
Yeah, we have season 4 starting mid-September on Gaia.com, and then in the area here in Los Angeles, or not. Yeah, Southern California, more like Orange County. I have something called Power Week, which is 5 days of training with me. That is the first 3 keys that from the mystery school tradition are really, really essential for people to be able to make a big leap into new paradigm, into really rising up to their higher potential, and really being ready to shift into and be an active member in helping make this world a better world. So those first 3 keys are the life activation, which is a one-on-one hour-and-a-half session with a practitioner. Then there's the Empower Thyself initiation, which is a 2-day training that gives a broad sweep of the foundational teachings of the mystery tradition, and an initiation at the end that really expands our potential, or our ability to flow more energy about tenfold in our lives. So it's kind of a 10x type of empowerment and acceleration. And then the third part of it is the galactic activation, which really awakens the final keys within our DNA blueprints to awakening to our galactic being, and that next evolutionary step that we're going to take, and what are the new paradigm ways of life on Earth that we need to start adapting into. I actually just ran one of those in Minneapolis, and so then the next one I have will be here in Southern California, and then beyond that, 2021 has a lot of new things in store. Yeah. We just kind of have to get through this year, I feel, of 2020 and all the uncertainties and the COVID, and it's really been an interesting disruptor. But at the same time, there's some silver linings, and there's some good that's coming out of it that I think is really pushing, and it can be used in a good way to help us take advantage of the time to really, do the inner work. And then the biggest things I'm learning from this is that where there's a will, there's always a way. And you just have to look for, even though there's a lot of doors that might be closing and seem like you can't go that way, there's always a way around it. And you have to look for the open doors. And so there's loopholes and open doors. You just have to find them. But you can't find them if you're looking at the fear and the limitation. You got to get beyond that right now and find them. So.
Yeah, and that pushes us to evolve. Like that's the role of obstacles and hardship, and where there's death, there is rebirth, and it's like we're moving into something new.
We are definitely moving into a new way of life. It's not going to be the same as it was before COVID, and hopefully it'll be better. But we have this transition process to go through, and so we just kind of have to have some patience, and the keys of like recognizing that my choices make a difference to the whole. I'm not separate from everybody else. Like we are all in this together, and my choices do impact others. So, we're struggling between this, like I want my personal choice and freedom to be how I want to be, regardless of who it impacts or what. But we're actually needing to shift into recognizing that we're a collective. And yes, we can have our personal freedoms, but we also need to have compassion and mindfulness towards the impact we have on the whole of the world and the whole of society and humanity. And so let's adapt to be more compassionate towards each other and more in cooperation with each other, rather than all this rugged individualism that we tend to get into. So there's some pretty big lessons coming through right now for humanity.
Yeah, seems like everybody's getting a big upgrade of consciousness. Like everyone I talk to is like, whoa, this is wrecking me and changing me and pushing me to go. So
that's great. Yeah.
Well, the last question I always ask everybody is, if I told you right now that the whole world was listening to you on the other side of this microphone and you could tell them one thing, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to believe in themselves, to recognize again that the power is within, and that we hold on to hope, because we are heading into some big times of change. But what's on the other side of that change, there's huge possibility. And both from a scientific, technological perspective, as well as a spiritual and consciousness shifting perspective, there's some really good things coming down the pipeline. But we're in a transformational process right now. And there's growing pains with that transformational process, and it's not always going to be easy and comfortable. So it's okay to get outside of your comfort zone, because outside that comfort zone is where there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of magic that can happen. And when you believe in yourself, you can also step into a role of participating with, where do you want to go? What do you want to create? How do you want your life to look like? And what can you do right now to start helping make that happen? Even if it's just working on inner changes within yourself. So hold on to hope and believe in yourself, and we're going to get through this. And there's really good times ahead.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being here. I learned so much. I hope everybody learned as much as I did. And if you want to learn more, watch Mystery Teachings. I can't wait for season 4. It's going to be really good.
And they can also find out more about me at theresabullard.com.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll link all of that in the caption so everybody can find you and what you're up to. And
thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah,
it's great.
Thank you.